Welcome to VideoBooks YouTube channel. We are explaining book summaries to add value and save the valuable time of your precious life. Before we start, make sure to subscribe to our channel for long book summaries with complete information from the book, The Risk, by Elle Kennedy from Briar U Series. The Briar U Series begins with a story that takes us right back into the collegiate hockey world we know and love. But this time, the spotlight shifts to a new generation of students trying to navigate the messy intersection of academic pressure, personal identity, and unexpected romance. At its core, this narrative is a classic study in opposites attracting, bringing together two people who seem completely mismatched on the surface, but share a deep underlying need to prove themselves on their own terms. It explores the vulnerability that comes with letting someone truly see past the carefully constructed armor we present to the world. The introduction establishes the vibrant, high-energy atmosphere of Briar University, a place where athletic success is revered and social hierarchies can feel incredibly rigid. We are introduced to the primary characters who will drive the emotional arc of the story, setting up a classic friction between a fiercely independent woman trying to reinvent herself and a popular, laser-focused hockey player who has zero interest in the distractions of a serious relationship. By grounding the narrative in the familiar, chaotic setting of the university campus, the introduction sets the stage for a journey filled with sharp wit, emotional growth, and the inevitable complications that arise when roommates try to deny the undeniable chemistry pulling them together. Chapter 1 opens from Summer, Hayward de Laurentiis's perspective as she undergoes a massive, chaotic transition in her life. Summer is arriving at Briar University after being expelled from her previous college, Brown University, due to an unfortunate and highly dramatic incident involving an accidental fire in her sorority house. This fresh start is weighed down by immense pressure, not just from her wealthy, demanding family who view her as a flighty socialite, but also from her own internal struggles with severe attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, which makes traditional academics an uphill battle. Summer is fiercely determined to prove to everyone, especially her father, that she can handle her new environment and succeed on her own merits without relying solely on her family's status and money. The primary conflict of the chapter begins the absolute moment Summer arrives at her new off-campus living situation. Due to a major administrative mix-up and some help from her brother, she believes she is moving into a comfortable apartment with a group of regular students. Instead, she walks through the front door and discovers she has accidentally been placed in a house entirely populated by members of the Briar University varsity hockey team. The house is loud, chaotic, and completely masculine, which instantly triggers Summer's anxieties about fitting in and keeping her focus entirely on her studies. She knows that living with a group of popular, rowdy athletes is the absolute last thing she needs if she wants to maintain a drama-free academic life. It is during this initial, confusing walkthrough of the house that Summer has her very first encounter with Colin Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald, who prefers to be called Fitz, is not at all what Summer expects when she thinks of a stereotypical college hockey player. While his teammates are loud and instantly flirtatious, Fitz is quiet, completely reserved, and deeply focused on his own world. He is a massive, heavily tattooed defenseman on the ice, but off the ice, he is an introverted video game designer and artist who values his solitude and peace above all else. When Summer bursts into the house with her vibrant personality, high energy, and expensive luggage, Fitz's immediate reaction is one of absolute dismay, viewing her as a walking, talking hurricane of a distraction that will destroy the quiet sanctuary of his home. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as the two characters share a brief, intensely charged conversation in the hallway. Despite the clear friction between Summer's extroverted, fashion-forward demeanor and Fitz's quiet, guarded nature, There is an immediate, undeniable current of physical attraction that catches both of them completely off guard. Summer tries to put on a confident, breezy front to hide how intimidated she is by the situation, while Fitz attempts to freeze her out with a detached, icy politeness. The chapter concludes with Summer realizing that surviving her semester at Briar is going to be infinitely more complicated than she originally anticipated, as she is now forced to share a roof with a man who seems entirely determined to ignore her, despite the obvious spark lingering between them. Chapter 2 switches to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, giving us a deep dive into his internal world and his immediate, highly resistant reaction to their new housemate. Fitz is a man who fiercely guards his personal space and his peace of mind. As an introverted artist and video game designer who happens to be a powerhouse defenseman for the Briar hockey team, he uses his quiet, aloof demeanor as a shield against the rest of the world. The absolute last thing he wants or needs in his sanctuary is a high-maintenance, incredibly loud, and devastatingly beautiful girl, upending his carefully structured routine. He is highly annoyed with his teammates, Hunter and Hollis, who are instantly enamored by Summer's presence and are more than eager to welcome her into the house. The central conflict of the chapter intensifies as Fitz tries his absolute best to establish rigid boundaries and maintain a cold distance from Summer. He convinces himself that she is exactly the kind of girl he needs to avoid at all costs, a wealthy, superficial socialite who thrives on drama and attention. However, his internal monologue betrays him completely, as he cannot help but notice every single detail about her, from her vibrant energy to the undeniable physical attraction that makes his blood rush. During a shared moment in the kitchen, Fitz actively tries to freeze her out with brief, detached answers, hoping to discourage her from trying to friend him or break down his defenses. Summer, however, does not back down easily, matching his icy politeness with her own sharp, witty retorts. The narrative also highlights the stark contrast between Fitz's public persona as a tough, aggressive athlete and his private passion for creative arts. While his roommates are busy obsessing over Summer's looks and planning how to win her over, Fitz retreats to his room to sketch and work on his game designs, trying to force her out of his head. He feels a deep sense of frustration, because he knows that living under the same roof with someone so magnetic is going to test his self-control to the absolute limit. He prides himself on his discipline, both on the ice and in his personal life. But Summer's proximity is already threatening to derail his focus before the academic semester even fully begins. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during a late-night encounter in the common area of the house. Fitz steps out of his room expecting a quiet, empty hallway, only to cross paths with Summer once again. In the dimly lit space, the superficial armor they both wear in public briefly slips away, exposing the raw, heavy sexual tension lingering between them. Fitz deliberately forces himself to remain stoic and detached, delivering a cool, dismissive comment that clearly hurts Summer's pride and reinforces her belief that he dislikes her. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as he retreats back into his room, completely furious with himself for being so intensely drawn to a girl he has sworn to keep at a distance, setting the stage for a prolonged battle of wills. Chapter 3 shifts back to Summer's perspective as the reality of her new living situation begins to settle into a daily routine. Navigating the sprawling hockey house is a constant lesson in sensory overload for her, particularly as she manages her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder in an environment that is rarely quiet. While the other roommates, Hunter and Hollis, are loud, easygoing, and completely welcoming, Summer finds her attention constantly drifting back to the one person who refuses to engage with her. Fitz remains a complete enigma, treating her like an unwelcome squatter in his space, which only fuels her stubborn determination to break through his icy exterior and prove she belongs there just as much as anyone else. The central conflict of the chapter focuses on Summer's first major social outing at Briar University. Hunter and Hollis convince her to attend a massive off-campus party hosted by the athletic department, arguing that it is the fastest way for her to integrate into the campus social scene and shake off the stigma of her expulsion from Brown. Summer matches the occasion with her usual high-fashion flair, dressing to impress and putting on a bright, confident persona to hide her deep-seated anxieties about starting over. When they arrive at the party, the atmosphere is suffocatingly loud and crowded, instantly testing her ability to stay grounded amidst the chaos of drinking games and roaring music. At the party, Summer quickly realizes that Fitz is also in attendance, though he is doing his absolute best to blend into the shadows away from the rowdy crowd. As she moves through the room, she catches him watching her with an intense, brooding gaze that contradicts his supposedly indifferent attitude toward her. The tension between them reaches a boiling point when a smooth-talking guy from a rival fraternity tries to corner Summer, misinterpreting her friendly nature as an open invitation. Before the situation can escalate, Fitz suddenly materializes from the crowd, his massive frame radiating a fiercely protective energy that instantly causes the fraternity guy to back down and retreat. The chapter reaches its emotional peak in the immediate aftermath of this confrontation, when Fitz pulls Summer away from the main party area into a quieter, dimly lit hallway. Instead of a sweet, romantic moment, the encounter quickly turns into a heated, breathless argument. Summer is furious with him for acting like a protective big brother when he has spent days ignoring her, while Fitz is visibly frustrated by how easily she attracts trouble and how intensely she distracts him from his desire for a quiet life. The argument lays bare the raw, magnetic attraction they are both desperately trying to fight. The chapter concludes with Summer walking away from him with a racing heart, realizing that behind Fitz's quiet, artistic persona lies a fiercely intense man who affects her far more than she is willing to admit. Chapter 4 returns to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the heavy emotional fallout and lingering physical tension from the intense hallway argument at the party. Fitz is completely furious with himself for letting his guard slip and allowing Summer to see just how much she affects him. He values his control above everything else, and the fact that a vibrant, high-maintenance fashion student can make him lose his temper so easily is deeply unsettling to his introverted nature. He retreats into his room at the hockey house, trying to submerge himself in his art and video game design work, but his mind keeps replaying the sight of her standing in that dim hallway, looking both defiant and incredibly vulnerable. The primary conflict of the chapter develops the next morning as the daily realities of sharing a house force them back into each other's orbits. The atmosphere in the kitchen is thick with awkwardness when Summer walks in to find Fitz alone, brewing coffee. Rather than engaging in another heated debate, Summer chooses to adopt a cool, professionally polite attitude that mirrors his original treatment of her. This sudden shift confuses and irritates Fitz, who finds himself strangely missing her usual bright, talkative energy. He realizes that her silence is far more distracting than her chatter, making it impossible for him to focus on his breakfast or his thoughts. The narrative deepens as Fitz watches Summer interact with his other roommates, Hunter and Hollis. Hunter in particular is becoming increasingly vocal about his attraction to Summer, openly flirting with her and trying to capture her attention at every opportunity. Watching his teammate make a move triggers an unfamiliar, highly uncomfortable wave of possessiveness inside Fitz. He knows he has no right to feel jealous since he explicitly told Summer he wasn't interested. But the thought of Hunter winning her over makes his blood boil on a purely protective and primal level, forcing him to confront the hypocrisy of his own rules. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that afternoon, when Fitz finds himself alone with Summer in the living room for a brief period. Unable to tolerate the cold wall of silence between them any longer, he takes a tentative step forward to address the tension, offering a quiet, clumsy apology for his harsh words at the party. Summer looks at him, her defenses lowering just enough for him to see the genuine hurt lingering in her eyes. The unspoken attraction between them flares up again, heavy and undeniable in the quiet house. The chapter concludes with Fitz realizing that his attempt to keep Summer at a distance has completely failed, as he is now thoroughly entangled in a silent, high-stakes game of emotional chicken with the one girl he was never supposed to want. Chapter 5 shifts back to Summer's perspective, highlighting her growing frustration with the confusing, mixed signals Colin Fitzgerald keeps sending her way. After his quiet apology in the living room, Summer hoped that their relationship would find a smoother, friendlier baseline. Instead, Fitz seems to have retreated right back behind his cold, unreadable armor, leaving her to navigate the chaotic household without knowing where she truly stands with him. This emotional turbulence only adds to the heavy academic stress she is facing as she tries to master her challenging fashion design courses while keeping her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder under strict management. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds when Summer decides to focus her energy on building a social life at Briar University that does not revolve entirely around her brooding roommate. She spends the afternoon on campus connecting with new classmates and immersing herself in her design projects, determined to prove that she is much more than the shallow socialite her family often labels her as. However, when she returns to the hockey house in the evening, she finds the living room transformed into a lively pre-game gathering hosted by Hunter and Hollis, forcing her right back into the tight-knit athletic circle. During the gathering, Hunter continues his relentless, charming pursuit of Summer, openly flirting with her and asking her to be his date for an upcoming athletic department gala. Summer, feeling lonely and craving a genuine connection in her new environment, finds herself reciprocating Hunter's easygoing warmth, even though her eyes keep involuntarily scanning the room for Fitz. Fitz remains detached from the main crowd, nursing a drink, and watching the easy, laughing interaction between Summer and Hunter, with a dark, intense look that radiates pure displeasure, creating a thick layer of unspoken tension in the room. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that night, after the gathering clears out and the house falls into a rare, heavy quiet. Summer steps into the kitchen to grab a glass of water and finds Fitz waiting for her in the shadows. Unable to contain her frustration any longer, she confronts him directly about his hot and cold behavior, demanding to know why he looks at her with such hostility when she interacts with his friends. The argument quickly shifts from anger to raw, breathless passion as the heavy wall of restraint between them finally fractures. The chapter concludes with a sudden, intensely charged physical proximity that leaves Summer completely breathless, realizing that despite her growing connection with Hunter, Fitz is the only man who has the power to completely shatter her composure. Chapter 6 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the intense internal warfare he is experiencing after the breathless, near-miss confrontation in the kitchen. Fitz is completely reeling from how close he came to crossing the line with Summer, and his logic is screaming at him to pull back before he does something he cannot undo. He knows that his roommate Hunter is genuinely interested in her, and in the tight-knit brotherhood of a hockey team, moving in on a teammate's target is a massive violation of unwritten locker room codes. Fitz forces himself to double down on his isolation, burying himself in his video game development work and maintaining a fiercely disciplined focus during team practices to burn off the restless energy consuming him. The primary conflict of the chapter develops during a high-stakes team practice session at the Briar University rink. The coaching staff is pushing the players to their absolute physical limits, preparing them for an upcoming match against a bitter rival. On the ice, Fitz is an absolute powerhouse, using his size and tactical intelligence to shut down every offensive play. However, during a break on the bench, Hunter openly talks to the guys about his plans for Summer, expressing how confident he is that he can win her over at the upcoming athletic gala. Hearing Hunter speak so casually about a girl who makes Fitz's own head spin triggers a dark, heavy wave of possessiveness that he has to fight desperately to conceal from his teammates. The narrative shifts back to the house later that evening, where the tension between Fitz and Summer remains thick and completely unresolved. Rather than engaging in another explosive argument, Fitz tries a new tactic of absolute clinical avoidance, treating her with the detached politeness of a stranger. This emotional freeze hurts Summer, who responds by leaning further into her friendship with Hunter, deliberately laughing louder at his jokes and spending more time in the common areas when Hunter is around. Watching this dynamic play out in his own living room pushes Fitz to the absolute brink of his sanity, forcing him to realize that his silence is not protecting him from her at all. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during a quiet moment late at night, when Fitz is working on his latest digital art designs in the common area, believing everyone else is asleep. Summer appears, dressed in comfortable lounge clothes, her usual high-fashion armor completely absent. Instead of fighting, they share a quiet, unexpectedly vulnerable conversation about his art and her design goals. For the first time, Fitz allows her to see the passionate, creative soul beneath his tough athlete exterior, and Summer listens with a genuine admiration that completely disarms him. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as he watches her walk back to her room, completely aware that his defenses have been permanently compromised by her sweetness, leaving him trapped between his loyalty to his teammate and his undeniable obsession with Summer. Chapter 7 shifts back to Summer's perspective, finding her more determined than ever to regain control of her life and emotions. After the surprisingly gentle and vulnerable late-night conversation with Fitz about his art, she woke up hoping the ice had finally melted between them. Instead, the morning brings a frustrating return to his usual distant behavior, which convinces Summer that she cannot keep wasting her energy trying to decode a man who refuses to meet her halfway. She decides to throw herself fully into preparing for the upcoming athletic department gala, viewing it as the perfect opportunity to establish herself as a confident, independent force at Briar University. The primary conflict of the chapter centers around the intense preparation for the gala and the growing expectations surrounding Hunter's dates with Summer. Hunter is incredibly attentive, charming, and open about his admiration for her, which provides a comforting contrast to Fitz's exhausting mixed signals. As Summer picks out a stunning, high-fashion dress and handles the logistics of the event, her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder presents its usual challenges, making it difficult to stay organized amidst the mounting anxiety of her first major campus appearance. She forces herself to focus on the positive, convincing herself that a fun, high-profile night out with a handsome, attentive hockey player like Hunter is exactly what she needs to permanently break free from Fitz's emotional hold. When the night of the gala arrives, the athletic venue is transformed into a glittering, sophisticated environment packed with boosters, faculty, and the university's top athletes. Summer looks absolutely breathtaking, drawing eyes the moment she enters the room on Hunter's arm. Hunter is the perfect gentleman, proudly introducing her to his friends and coaches, which gives Summer a rare sense of belonging that she has desperately craved since her expulsion from Brown. However, the true test of her composure comes when she spots Fitz across the room, looking exceptionally striking in a formal suit that highlights his massive frame, completely detached from the boisterous crowd around him. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during a brief, intense encounter near the terrace doors, away from the main celebration. Summer steps out for a breath of fresh air, only to find Fitz already there, staring out into the night. Cut off from the distractions of the party, the unspoken tension between them flares up with an overwhelming intensity. Fitz looks at her in her gala dress with a raw, undisguised hunger that completely contradicts his cold demeanor, while Summer confronts him about his ongoing hypocrisy and the unfairness of his silent judgment. The chapter concludes with Summer walking back into the crowded ballroom with a racing heart, fiercely torn between the easy, uncomplicated security Hunter offers and the dangerous, undeniable pull she feels toward Fitz. Chapter 8 returns to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the absolute torment of watching the girl he is completely obsessed with spend the evening on the arm of one of his closest teammates. Throughout the entire athletic gala, Fitz has been a dark, silent presence in the background, his eyes involuntarily tracking Summer's every move across the crowded room. He watches the way she laughs at Hunter's jokes and how perfectly she fits into the high-profile social world, feeling a toxic mixture of intense jealousy and deep self-loathing. He knows his own stubbornness and fear of vulnerability are the only reasons she is with Hunter tonight instead of him, yet he feels entirely powerless to stop the downward spiral of his emotions. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies when the gala concludes and everyone heads back to the hockey house for an after-party. The house is quickly packed with rowdy students, loud music, and flowing alcohol, creating a chaotic environment that Fitz usually avoids at all costs. Instead of retreating to his bedroom, as he normally would, Fitz remains downstairs, driven by a stubborn, self-destructive need to watch over Summer. His protective instincts are pushed to the limit as he witnesses Hunter becoming increasingly affectionate with her, wrapping his arm around her waist and guiding her through the crowd, making it clear to the entire room that he intends to claim her. The narrative reaches a critical tipping point when Hunter leaves Summer alone in the living room for a few minutes to grab fresh drinks from the kitchen. Sensing his opportunity, Fitz breaks his vow of silence and steps directly into her path, his massive presence instantly cutting her off from the rest of the party. The conversation starts with a sharp, defensive edge as Summer mocks his sudden interest in her whereabouts, but the thick wall of anger quickly dissolves into raw, breathless desperation. Fitz looks down at her, his usual discipline completely shattering under the weight of his jealousy, and admits in a low, strained voice that watching her with Hunter is tearing him apart inside. The chapter reaches its emotional peak in this brief, highly charged confrontation before Hunter can return. For the first time, Fitz completely drops his cold, artistic armor and allows Summer to see the full, terrifying depth of his attraction to her. The air between them is thick with a dangerous, unspoken promise, leaving Summer completely stunned by the sudden intensity of his confession. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as Hunter steps back into the room with the drinks, forcing Fitz to instantly mask his emotions and step back into the shadows, fully aware that he has just crossed a dangerous line from which there is absolutely no turning back. Chapter 9 shifts back to Summer's perspective, finding her mind in a state of absolute chaos following Fitz's stunning, low-voiced confession at the after-party. Her thoughts are spinning completely out of control as she tries to reconcile the cold, dismissive roommate who ignored her for weeks with the intensely passionate man who admitted that watching her with someone else was tearing him apart. This emotional confusion makes it incredibly difficult for her to focus on her demanding fashion history assignments, causing her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder symptoms to flare up significantly as she sits at her desk, staring at her textbooks while her mind continuously loops back to the raw intensity in Fitz's eyes. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies during a casual afternoon gathering in the living room of the hockey house. Hunter is lounging on the couch, completely relaxed and open about his intentions to take Summer out on a proper official date to a high-end restaurant downtown, viewing the success of the gala as a green light to move their relationship forward. Summer feels an immense amount of guilt as she sits nearby, trying to match Hunter's easygoing enthusiasm, while acutely aware that Fitz is sitting just across the room, pretending to be deeply engrossed in a video game concept sketch on his tablet, but radiating an unmistakable rigid tension. The narrative deepens as Summer tries to find a moment of clarity by stepping away from the house to clear her head on campus. She uses the long walk to convince herself that pursuing a relationship with Hunter is the only logical, safe choice for her sanity, given that Hunter is stable, upfront, and genuinely proud to be seen with her, whereas Fitz represents a dangerous roller coaster of mixed signals and hidden emotions. However, logic fails her completely when she returns to the house late that evening and finds the main floor entirely dark and quiet, save for a single light spilling out from the kitchen area where Fitz is standing alone. The chapter reaches its emotional peak when Summer decides to confront the elephant in the room instead of retreating to her bedroom. She walks into the kitchen and demands that Fitz explain his sudden outburst from the night before, accusing him of playing games with her emotions just because his pride was wounded by Hunter's attention. Fitz drops his sketchbook onto the counter, his usual stoic discipline completely evaporating as he steps into her personal space, his massive frame casting a long shadow over her. The argument swiftly dissolves into a breathless, highly charged moment of emotional honesty, where both characters admit how exhausted they are from fighting the magnetic pull between them, concluding with a sudden, near-miss proximity that leaves Summer's heart pounding violently against her ribs as she realizes that no matter how hard she tries to choose the safe path with Hunter, her soul is entirely captivated by the quiet defenseman. Chapter 10 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the heavy psychological weight of the internal crisis that is slowly tearing him apart. Fitz is completely trapped between his rigid sense of loyalty to his teammate Hunter and the absolute, consuming obsession he feels for Summer. He knows that his behavior in the kitchen the previous night was a massive lapse in self-control, and the memory of how close he came to crossing the line entirely makes his hands shake as he tries to focus on his early morning workouts at the Briar Athletic Center. He forces himself to skate harder and lift heavier, desperately trying to use physical exhaustion to drown out the constant, mocking echo of Summer's voice in his head. The primary conflict of the chapter deepens when the hockey team gathers in the locker room after a grueling practice session. Hunter is in an exceptionally good mood, openly discussing the final arrangements for his upcoming official date with Summer, even asking the guys for recommendations on a specific upscale restaurant downtown. Listening to his friend plan a romantic evening for the woman who occupies Fitz's every waking thought feels like a physical blow to his chest. Fitz is forced to sit in absolute agonizing silence, staring down at his skates and nodding along to maintain appearances, fully aware that a single word from him could shatter the peace of the locker room and ruin his brotherhood with Hunter. The narrative shifts back to the hockey house later that afternoon, where the physical layout of the building seems to constantly force Fitz and Summer into inadvertent proximity. While Hunter is away at a late afternoon seminar, Fitz steps into the living room to retrieve a textbook, only to find Summer sitting on the floor surrounded by fabric swatches and sketch pads for her fashion design courses. Instead of running away as his logic dictates, Fitz finds himself completely mesmerized by her creative process. He watches her struggle to organize her thoughts due to her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and his protective nature instantly overrides his cold armor as he quietly offers a few insightful, artistic suggestions on color theory that completely unlock her design block. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this brief, unexpected moment of shared creative harmony. For a few short minutes, the heavy romantic tension and the shadow of Hunter completely vanish, replaced by a deep, intellectual connection between two artists who truly understand each other's passion. Summer looks up at him with a breathtaking smile of pure gratitude, and Fitz feels a profound, terrifying shift inside his chest, realizing that his feelings for her go infinitely deeper than mere physical desire. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as Hunter's car pulls into the driveway outside, forcing Fitz to abruptly gather his things and retreat back to his room, completely devastated by the realization that he is officially falling in love with a girl he is supposed to be giving away. Chapter 11 shifts back to Summer's perspective as the day of her official, formal date with Hunter finally arrives. The atmosphere inside the hockey house is thick with anticipation, and Summer spends the afternoon trying to calm her racing thoughts. Hunter has been the absolute definition of a perfect gentleman, going out of his way to make her feel cherished and special, which stands in stark contrast to the exhausting emotional roller coaster she experiences whenever she looks at Fitz. She forces herself to focus entirely on getting ready, choosing an elegant outfit and applying her makeup with meticulous care, desperately hoping that a wonderful evening out will finally anchor her feelings to Hunter and erase Fitz from her mind completely. The primary conflict of the chapter begins the moment Summer descends the stairs into the living room to meet Hunter. Hunter looks genuinely awestruck by her appearance, holding out a beautiful corsage and greeting her with his signature easygoing warmth. However, the picture-perfect moment is completely derailed because Fitz is standing near the kitchen entrance, watching the entire scene unfold. When Summer's eyes meet Fitz's, the raw, suffocating intensity in his gaze makes her breath catch in her throat. The sheer contrast between Hunter's cheerful, open admiration and Fitz's dark, brooding silence creates a suffocating layer of tension that makes it difficult for Summer to even walk out the front door. The narrative shifts to the upscale downtown restaurant, where Hunter has pulled out all the stops to ensure a flawless date. The food is spectacular, the lighting is romantic, and Hunter is completely attentive, talking about his hockey goals and asking genuine questions about her fashion design ambitions. By all objective measures, the date is a massive success, and Summer actively tries to lose herself in Hunter's charming company. Yet, despite her best efforts, her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind continuously betrays her, fragmenting her focus and causing her thoughts to repeatedly drift back to the quiet, artistic defenseman sitting back at the house, making her feel an immense wave of guilt for not being fully present with the man who actually chose her. The chapter reaches its emotional peak when Hunter drives Summer back to the house after dinner and walks her to the front porch. The night air is cool and quiet as Hunter steps close, wrapping his arms around her waist and leaning down to deliver a deep, thoroughly romantic goodnight kiss. Summer kisses him back, desperately trying to force herself to feel the spark she knows should be there. However, as she looks past Hunter's shoulder through the glass panel of the front door, she sees a dark silhouette standing at the top of the stairs inside the house. The chapter concludes with Summer pulling away from the kiss with a heavy, conflicted heart, fully realizing that while Hunter is doing everything right, her soul is completely unresponsive because her heart already belongs to the man watching them from the shadows. Chapter 12 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the absolute, suffocating agony of having witnessed Hunter and Summer's goodnight kiss from the top of the stairs. Fitz is completely consumed by a toxic mixture of jealousy and self-hatred as he retreats to his bedroom, slamming the door shut against the world. He knows he has absolutely no right to be angry, since his own fear of vulnerability and his strict adherence to locker room loyalty are the very things keeping him from claiming Summer. He spends the entire night pacing his room and staring at his digital design tablet, completely unable to find any creative release because his mind is utterly haunted by the image of Summer in another man's arms. The primary conflict of the chapter develops the following morning when Fitz is forced to interact with a beaming, triumphant Hunter in the kitchen. Hunter is in an exceptionally fantastic mood, openly detailing how incredible the date was and expressing his absolute certainty that Summer is the girl he wants to be with long-term. Every single word out of Hunter's mouth feels like a direct, physical blow to Fitz's chest. Fitz is forced to nod along and maintain his stoic, supportive teammate persona, while his insides are completely twisting with resentment, forcing him to realize that his silent sacrifice is slowly destroying his mental sanity and his ability to be a good friend. The narrative shifts to the Briar University ice rink later that afternoon, where the built-up emotional frustration inside Fitz completely boils over during a high-stakes team scrimmage. Normally a disciplined and highly tactical defenseman who avoids unnecessary aggression, Fitz begins playing with a dangerous, reckless edge that catches his coaches and teammates completely off guard. He delivers a series of bone-crushing checks, eventually colliding heavily with Hunter during a play at the boards. The collision triggers a brief, incredibly tense standoff between the two friends on the ice, with the coaching staff stepping in to separate them before a full physical fight can break out, leaving the entire team wondering what has suddenly possessed their usually calm alternative captain. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that evening back at the hockey house, when Fitz finds himself completely alone with Summer in the hallway. Summer looks at him with a mixture of confusion and deep-seated hurt, demanding to know why he was lurking in the shadows the previous night, and why he is suddenly acting out so violently against Hunter on the ice. Cut off from any distractions, Fitz's ironclad control completely snaps. He steps aggressively into her personal space, his eyes flashing with a raw, terrifying intensity as he tells her that watching her with Hunter is driving him entirely insane. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as he turns on his heel and storms out of the house into the cold night air, fully aware that his silence has been permanently shattered and that a massive storm is about to break over the entire household. Chapter 13 shifts back to Summer's perspective, finding her completely overwhelmed by the explosive intensity of Fitz's hallway confrontation before he stormed out into the night. Her mind is a chaotic battlefield of conflicting emotions, making it nearly impossible for her to maintain any semblance of focus on her grueling fashion design coursework. Her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder symptoms are running completely rampant as she sits at her desk, staring blankly at her fabric patterns, while her inner thoughts continuously replay Fitz's desperate admission that watching her with Hunter was driving him completely insane. She feels deeply trapped between the steady, public affection Hunter offers and the dangerous, hidden passion that Fitz keeps pulling her into. The primary conflict of the chapter deepens when Hunter notices a sudden, distinct change in Summer's demeanor. He stops by her room later that afternoon with a cheerful surprise, wanting to spend a quiet evening together, planning their next date. Instead of her usual bright and talkative self, Summer is noticeably quiet, distracted, and deeply anxious, which immediately triggers Hunter's internal radar. He gently asks if he did something wrong during their formal date, or if she is having second thoughts about their relationship. Summer is forced to lie to his face, claiming her distant behavior is simply due to academic stress and exhaustion, which only intensifies the massive wave of guilt crushing her chest because Hunter is doing absolutely everything right. The narrative shifts to the campus the next morning, where Summer decides to visit the art and digital design department to clear her head and focus on a research project. While walking through a quiet gallery hallway, she accidentally stumbles upon a display of student design portfolios and spots Fitz's name on a digital concept art board. She stops to look at his work and is completely spellbound by the sheer depth, complexity, and raw emotion embedded in his video game characters and landscapes. Seeing his inner world laid bare on the screen makes her realize that his quiet, broody exterior is just a shield to protect a deeply sensitive and brilliant artistic soul, drawing her even further into his emotional orbit. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that evening, when Fitz finally returns to the hockey house after a full day of avoiding everyone. Summer intercepts him in the dimly lit foyer, refusing to let him run away to his bedroom without a proper conversation. She directly challenges his hot and cold behavior, demanding to know how he expects her to build a real relationship with Hunter when he keeps dropping emotional bombs on her in secret. Fitz looks down at her, his massive frame completely rigid with a mixture of exhaustion and undeniable hunger, and admits that he has no right to ask anything of her, yet he cannot stop himself from wanting her. The chapter concludes with Summer standing alone in the quiet hallway as Fitz retreats upstairs, her heart pounding violently as she realizes that the fragile peace of the household is on the absolute verge of collapsing. Chapter 14 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the heavy, suffocating atmosphere of a house on the absolute brink of an emotional explosion. Fitz is completely trapped inside his own mind, fully aware that his recent outburst has made a normal coexistence impossible. He spends his morning trying to drown his frustration in his video game design work, staring at his digital tablet and trying to channel his chaotic emotions into his art. Every time he hears Summer's footsteps in the hallway outside his room, his chest tightens with a toxic mixture of intense longing and deep guilt, forcing him to confront the reality that his quiet, controlled life has been completely dismantled. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies during a mandatory team video review session at the Briar University athletic facility. The players are gathered in a dark theatre room, analysing game footage alongside the coaching staff to prepare for an upcoming weekend game. Hunter sits just a few chairs away from Fitz, completely focused on the strategic breakdowns and occasionally leaning over to make a casual comment about the upcoming match. Looking at his friend, Fitz feels an overwhelming wave of self-loathing for harboring such intense, hidden feelings for Summer. He realizes that keeping this massive secret is not just unfair to himself, but a complete betrayal of the locker room brotherhood he has always held sacred. The narrative shifts back to the hockey house later that evening, where a massive weekend party is being hosted by the team. The entire downstairs area is quickly flooded with music, flashing lights, and a massive crowd of students, creating a loud, suffocating environment that Fitz typically avoids at all costs. Instead of hiding in his room, Fitz forces himself to go downstairs, driven by a restless, protective need to see how Summer is navigating the rowdy crowd. He spots her almost immediately, looking exceptionally beautiful, but clearly overwhelmed by the sensory chaos around her, her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder making it difficult for her to ground herself in the loud, shifting environment. The chapter reaches its emotional peak when Hunter gets pulled away by some alumni boosters near the front door, leaving Summer completely alone by the kitchen entrance. Seizing the brief window of opportunity, Fitz steps directly into her path, his massive frame instantly cutting her off from the rest of the party. The conversation begins with a defensive edge as Summer tries to push past him, but the thick wall of anger quickly dissolves into raw, breathless desperation in the dim light. Fitz looks down at her, his usual discipline completely shattering under the weight of his feelings, and whispers that he cannot keep pretending to be just a bystander in her life. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as Hunter begins walking back across the room toward them, forcing Fitz to instantly step back into the shadows, fully aware that the dangerous game they are playing is running out of time. Chapter 15 shifts back to Summer's perspective, finding her completely paralyzed by the suffocating proximity of Fitz at the weekend party, before Hunter managed to rejoin them. The constant, high-stakes emotional evasion is beginning to take a massive toll on her academic performance at Briar University. She spends the morning sitting in her fashion design studio class, completely unable to focus on her stitching patterns because her mind is looping back to the raw desperation in Fitz's voice. Her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder makes it incredibly difficult to quiet her racing thoughts, and she realizes that the longer she leaves this silent tension unresolved, the more her entire life will continue to spiral out of control. The primary conflict of the chapter develops later that afternoon, when Summer returns to the hockey house and finds a completely unexpected visitor waiting for her in the living room. Her father, a wealthy, intimidating man who views her past academic failures with immense disappointment, has made an unannounced stop to check on her progress. The conversation is incredibly tense, with her father delivering a harsh, conditional lecture about how this semester at Briar is her absolute last chance to prove she can be responsible before he completely cuts her off financially. Summer forces herself to maintain a composed, confident front, but inside she is completely crumbling under the familiar weight of his harsh judgment. The narrative deepens as the confrontation with her father leaves Summer in a state of absolute emotional vulnerability. After her father leaves, she retreats to the back porch of the house to hide her tears, feeling entirely alone and misunderstood by the people who are supposed to love her. To her immense surprise, it is not Hunter who finds her, but Fitz. He steps out onto the porch, his usual unreadable armor completely gone, replaced by a quiet, fierce empathy. Instead of asking intrusive questions, Fitz simply sits down beside her in the quiet evening air, offering his silent, steady presence as a comfort, proving that he understands her pain without her needing to utter a single word. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during this quiet, shared moment on the porch steps. For the first time, Summer drops all of her defensive, high-fashion bravado and allows Fitz to see the deep, raw insecurities she harbors about her worth and her learning disabilities. Fitz listens with absolute reverence, holding her gaze and telling her in a low, intense voice that her father is completely blind to how brilliant and resilient she truly is. The profound emotional intimacy of his words completely eclipses any physical attraction they have felt before. The chapter concludes with Summer staring at him in the dim light, her heart aching with the devastating realization that while Hunter is the man she is supposed to want, Fitz is the only person who truly sees her. Chapter 16 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the heavy, lingering emotional resonance of their quiet conversation on the back porch. Helping Summer through her moment of vulnerability has completely shifted something fundamental inside Fitz. The protective walls he built around his heart are entirely gone, and he can no longer pretend that his feelings for her are just a passing physical attraction. He spends his morning staring at a blank canvas in his room, completely unable to channel his thoughts into his usual digital designs, because his mind is entirely occupied by the memory of holding her gaze in the dark and wishing he could shield her from her father's harsh judgment. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies when the hockey team hits the ice for a crucial mid-season game against one of their biggest rivals. The arena is packed, the crowd is deafening, and the pressure is immense. On the ice, Fitz tries to channel his chaotic internal energy into his gameplay, executing flawless defensive maneuvers and putting his body on the line to protect their lead. However, every time he looks up into the student section, his eyes involuntarily search the crowd until they land on Summer, who is sitting next to the players' families. Seeing her cheering enthusiastically gives him a surge of adrenaline, but the bitter reminder that she is there as Hunter's guest dampens his triumph completely. The narrative reaches a critical turning point back at the hockey house after the game, where the team is celebrating a hard-fought victory. The atmosphere downstairs is incredibly loud, rowdy, and filled with celebratory music. Hunter is riding a massive high from scoring the winning goal, and he naturally pulls Summer close to share in his excitement, kissing her cheek and holding her hand in front of the entire team. Watching this public display of affection in the middle of their living room pushes Fitz past his absolute breaking point, making the air in the room feel completely unbreathable. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that night, when the party finally thins out and the house grows quiet. Fitz is sitting alone in the dim kitchen nursing a drink, when Summer walks in to clear away some glasses. Unable to tolerate the agonizing charade a second longer, Fitz stands up and cuts off her path, his massive frame radiating a raw, desperate energy. He looks down at her and speaks with absolute, breathless honesty, telling her that he is entirely done hiding his feelings and that he cannot watch her pretend to belong to someone else when he knows she feels the connection between them too. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as Summer stares up at him, completely frozen by the sheer magnitude of his confession, as the final boundaries holding them apart begin to dissolve entirely. Chapter 17 shifts back to Summer's perspective, finding her completely paralyzed in the middle of the kitchen as the weight of Fitz's raw confession hangs heavily in the quiet air. Her mind is a total whirlwind, making it completely impossible to sort through her emotions. For weeks, she has been desperately trying to follow the rules, to be the good girlfriend to Hunter, and to prove to her father that she can live a structured, drama-free life. Yet, standing inches away from Fitz, listening to him finally admit that he is completely done hiding his feelings, shatters every single ounce of her resolve. The sheer honesty in his voice makes her heart race so violently that her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind struggles to find any coherent words to reply. The primary conflict of the chapter develops the next morning as the heavy atmosphere of secrets begins to suffocate Summer from the inside out. Hunter remains completely oblivious to the massive shift that occurred in the kitchen, continuing to treat her with his usual open, cheerful affection. He brings her a coffee before her early morning classes and talks excitedly about their plans for the upcoming weekend. The contrast between Hunter's genuine, unsuspecting kindness and the burning secret she shares with Fitz creates a crushing wave of guilt in Summer's chest. She realizes that by staying silent and refusing to make a definitive choice, she is actively hurting a good guy who has done absolutely nothing wrong. The narrative deepens later that afternoon when Summer attends her fashion design studio to work on a major midterm project. She attempts to channel her chaotic internal energy into her sketches, cutting fabric with a fierce, restless energy. However, the lack of focus caught up with her, and she accidentally ruins a complex stitching pattern she spent days perfecting. Frustrated and on the verge of tears, she realizes that the emotional turmoil at home is completely bleeding into her academic life, threatening the one thing she's fighting so hard to secure. She knows she cannot keep living in this agonizing limbo any longer. She has to confront the situation before it destroys her fresh start at Briar University entirely. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that evening, when Summer returns to the hockey house, determined to find Fitz and demand a final, definitive conversation about what happens next. Instead, she walks into the living room and finds Hunter and Fitz sitting together on the couch, reviewing game tapes in absolute, comfortable camaraderie. Watching the two friends interact with such easy brotherhood makes the air leave Summer's lungs completely. Fitz looks up, his dark gaze meeting hers with a silent, heavy intensity that says everything, while Hunter smiles warmly and invites her to sit down beside them. The chapter concludes with Summer standing frozen at the edge of the room, completely trapped in a high-stakes emotional minefield, fully aware that the very next step she takes will inevitably shatter the peace of the entire house. Chapter 18 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the absolute psychological torture of sitting on the couch next to Hunter while Summer stands frozen at the edge of the room. The easy camaraderie Fitz usually feels with his teammate feels entirely hollow, replaced by a dark, suffocating guilt that makes it difficult to even look Hunter in the eye. Fitz can feel the heavy, burning weight of Summer's gaze on him, and the silent message passing between them is deafening. He knows that his confession in the kitchen changed the rules of the game permanently, and seeing her look so profoundly conflicted convinces him that they are running out of room to hide. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies after Hunter finally leaves the living room to take a phone call from his family, leaving Fitz and Summer entirely alone in the sudden, heavy quiet. Instead of retreating to her bedroom as she normally would, Summer steps deeper into the room, her eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and sheer exhaustion. She confronts Fitz in a fierce, hushed whisper, accusing him of placing her in an impossible position by admitting his feelings while still maintaining a front of brotherhood with Hunter. Fitz stands up, his massive frame radiating a tense, restless energy as he defends his honesty, telling her that keeping his silence was slowly destroying his mind, and that he could no longer live a lie in his own house. The narrative shifts to the next day at the Briar Athletic Center, where the coaching staff holds an intense, closed-door strategy meeting with the team captains. As an alternative captain, Fitz is expected to lead by example and voice his tactical inputs, but his focus is completely fractured. During the film session, Hunter claps him on the shoulder, offering a word of praise for Fitz's defensive positioning in the previous game. The genuine, unsuspecting trust in Hunter's gesture feels like a physical knife to Fitz's chest, forcing him to confront the grim reality that his unspoken obsession with Summer is actively poisoning the brotherhood that anchors his entire athletic career. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that evening when Fitz returns to the house and finds Summer working late in the communal dining area, trying to salvage her ruined fashion design project. The high-fashion armor she usually wears is completely gone, replaced by a raw, stressed vulnerability that instantly triggers his protective instincts. Sitting down across from her, Fitz gently pulls the tangled fabric from her hands, using his own artistic background to guide her through a new layout. As their fingers brush in the dim light, the heavy wall of restraint they have built over weeks completely disintegrates. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as he looks into Summer's eyes and realizes that the time for talking has officially ended, setting the stage for a massive, unavoidable collision between his loyalty and his heart. Chapter 19 shifts back to Summer's perspective, finding her completely breathless as she sits across from Fitz at the dining table. The gentle touch of his hands guiding her through her design layout sends a literal shockwave through her system, making it entirely impossible to maintain her defenses. For the first time, the unspoken understanding between them is completely out in the open without any anger or shouting. Fitz is not just an impossible distraction anymore. He is the only person who can instantly soothe her chaotic attention deficit hyperactivity disorder thoughts and bring a sense of absolute calm to her world. The primary conflict of the chapter reaches a critical breaking point the very next morning. Hunter enters the kitchen while Summer is making breakfast, his expression unusually serious and completely devoid of his usual easygoing smile. He explains that he isn't blind, and has noticed the heavy, suffocating tension that fills the room whenever Summer and Fitz are near each other. Instead of launching into an angry accusation, Hunter handles the situation with a heartbreaking level of maturity, asking Summer directly if her heart is truly in their relationship, or if there is something going on between her and his teammate. The weight of the truth presses down on Summer's chest with an agonizing force. Looking into Hunter's honest, trusting eyes, she realizes that continuing to lie would be the ultimate betrayal of his kindness. With tears blurring her vision, she takes a deep breath and confesses that while she genuinely cared for him, she has developed deep, undeniable feelings for Fitz that she can no longer ignore or suppress. Hunter is visibly devastated by the admission, his jaw tightening as he processes the double betrayal from both the girl he was falling for and one of his closest friends on the team. The chapter reaches its emotional peak in the immediate fallout of this confession. Hunter leaves the kitchen without a word, walking straight into the living room where Fitz has just descended the stairs. A massive, volatile confrontation erupts between the two teammates as Hunter unleashes weeks of built-up frustration, accusing Fitz of breaking the ultimate locker room rule and stabbing him in the back. Fitz stands his ground, refusing to fight back physically out of pure guilt, but firmly refusing to apologize for loving Summer. The chapter concludes with Summer standing in the doorway, watching the complete fracture of a brotherhood she accidentally caused, fully aware that her life at Briar University has changed forever. Chapter 20 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the heavy, suffocating aftermath of the explosive confrontation that has officially fractured the hockey house. The silence left in the wake of Hunter's departure is deafening, and the weight of the betrayal hangs over the entire home. Fitz stands in the center of the living room, completely numb, his chest aching from the verbal blows his teammate delivered. He knows he deserved every single bit of Hunter's anger, yet as he looks across the room at Summer, who is standing trembling in the doorway with tears in her eyes, he cannot bring himself to regret the honesty that brought them to this point. The primary conflict of the chapter focuses on the immediate, high-stakes consequences within the Briar University hockey team. When Fitz arrives at the arena for afternoon practice, the atmosphere in the locker room is icy and completely hostile. Word of the fallout between the alternative captain and his teammate has traveled fast, and the tight-knit brotherhood is visibly divided. Hunter refuses to look at him, and the coaching staff immediately senses the toxic tension on the ice. During a scrimmage, the lack of cohesion leads to sloppy plays and bitter exchanges, forcing the head coach to pull both Fitz and Hunter into his office for a harsh lecture about letting personal drama jeopardize the team's championship run. The narrative deepens later that evening when Fitz returns to the house, finding the common areas empty and a heavy sense of isolation settling into the walls. Hollis and the other teammates have gone out, leaving the house completely quiet. Fitz retreats to his room and tries to submerge his guilt into his digital art, but the creative release fails him entirely. Unable to bear the distance any longer, he walks down the hallway and knocks gently on Summer's door. When she opens it, her face pale and devoid of her usual vibrant energy, the last of his emotional defenses completely crumble. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as Fitz steps into her room and closes the door, shutting out the rest of the judgmental world. For the very first time, there are no secrets, no mixed signals, and no looming shadows of loyalty holding them back. Fitz wraps his massive arms around Summer, pulling her tight against his chest as she finally lets her tears fall. In the quiet sanctuary of her room, he whispers a fierce, breathless promise that he is going to stand by her through whatever chaos follows, sealing his words with a deep, intensely tender kiss that signifies the true, official beginning of their relationship. even as the storm outside continues to rage. Chapter 21 shifts back to Summer's perspective, finding her enveloped in a strange mixture of absolute relief and lingering anxiety the morning after Fitz's fierce promise. Waking up in a reality where she no longer has to hide her feelings for the quiet defenseman feels like a massive weight has been lifted from her chest. However, the external world is quick to crash into her newfound peace. As she prepares for her morning classes, her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder symptoms resurface with a vengeance, fueled by the nervous anticipation of how the rest of the campus and her father will react when the news of her breakup with Hunter and her new relationship with Fitz inevitably spreads. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds when Summer steps onto the Briar University campus. The social fallout is immediate. In the student union and near her fashion design classes, she notices the heavy stares and hushed whispers from other students, particularly those connected to the athletic department. Hunter is a highly popular figure on campus, and the rumor mill has quickly painted Summer as the dramatic catalyst who disrupted the hockey team's harmony. She forces herself to keep her chin up, leaning into her signature high-fashion wardrobe as a protective armor, but the public scrutiny chips away at her confidence, making her feel deeply isolated outside the walls of the hockey house. The narrative shifts to her afternoon design studio, where the pressure reaches a boiling point. Her professor announces a sudden, high-stakes critique of their midterm collections, requiring each student to present their progress in front of the entire class. Still shaken by the campus gossip and the memory of her father's harsh ultimatums, Summer struggles to articulate her creative vision. Her mind fragments under the stress, and she stumbles through her presentation, facing sharp criticisms from her professor about a lack of cohesion in her fabric choices. Feeling like an absolute failure, she rushes out of the studio the moment class ends, desperate to find a place where she doesn't have to prove her worth. The chapter reaches its emotional peak when Summer returns to the hockey house, expecting to hide in her room, only to find Fitz waiting for her in the living room. Recognizing the raw exhaustion and defeat written all over her face, Fitz doesn't say a word. He simply takes her hand and leads her up to his room, a space she has rarely entered. He pulls up a chair for her next to his digital design desk and sits down beside her, opening up his active video game projects. For the next few hours, he patiently walks her through his creative world, showing her how he builds complex landscapes from simple sketches and invites her to input her own ideas on color and texture. The profound intellectual and creative harmony completely grounds Summer's racing thoughts. The chapter concludes with Summer sitting close to Fitz in the dim light of his desk lamp, realizing that while the world outside is chaotic and judgmental, his presence provides the exact focus and safety she has spent her entire life searching for. Chapter 22 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing a newfound sense of clarity and protective determination. Seeing Summer find peace at his design desk the previous night has solidified his priorities completely. He is done letting fear and external opinions dictate his life. When he wakes up early to work on his character animations, watching her sleep peacefully across his room gives him a grounded focus he has never experienced before. His logic is no longer screaming at him to run away. Instead, it is entirely focused on how to shield her from the ongoing campus backlash and the hostility waiting for him at the rink. The primary conflict of the chapter hits a dangerous peak during an official team meeting before a crucial away game. The head coach is furious about the lingering, toxic tension between his star alternative captain and his top offensive player, demanding a resolution before they step onto the bus. In the high-stakes environment of the team theater, Hunter finally breaks his silence, confronting Fitz directly in front of the coaching staff. The exchange is incredibly sharp and intense, but instead of retreating into his usual defensive silence, Fitz stands his ground with absolute maturity. He acknowledges his failure in handling the situation transparently, but firmly states that his commitment to Summer is permanent, forcing the team to realize that the personal drama cannot be undone. The narrative shifts to the bus ride to the away arena, where the physical layout forces the team into a tense, divided silence. Fitz sits by the window, completely isolated from the boisterous card games and music happening in the back of the bus. He uses the long hours to focus entirely on his digital art, channeling the raw, chaotic energy of the team's hostility into a striking new character concept. Despite the heavy weight of the locker room isolation, he feels a profound sense of internal peace, realizing that losing the easy popularity he once had is a small price to pay for the genuine, soul-deep connection he now shares with Summer. The chapter reaches its emotional peak when the team finally hits the ice under the blinding stadium lights of their rival's arena. The game is brutal, fast-paced, and physically punishing, with the opposing team actively exploiting the visible lack of chemistry between Fitz and Hunter. During a critical defensive breakdown in the third period, Fitz is forced to make a split-second decision, throwing his entire massive frame into a bone-crushing block to shield Hunter from a dangerous blindside hit. The selfless play saves the game and leaves both teammates staring at each other in the chaotic aftermath on the ice. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as they secure a narrow victory, fully aware that while the brotherhood with Hunter is permanently altered, a mutual, professional respect has been restored, clearing the path for him to return home to the girl he loves without the crushing weight of guilt holding him back. Chapter 23 shifts back to Summer's perspective, finding her in a state of nervous excitement as she awaits Fitz's return from the away game. The news of his selfless on-ice block to protect Hunter has already reached campus, and the intense public hostility directed toward her has finally begun to simmer down. The sheer relief makes it much easier for her to ground herself, allowing her to approach her fashion design coursework with a level of focus she has drastically lacked over the past few weeks. Her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind is finally working with her instead of against her, channeling her vibrant energy into completing her revised midterm collection. The primary conflict of the chapter arises when Summer receives a sudden, demanding phone call from her father, who has heard rumors about her shifting relationship status within the hockey house. He is furious, accusing her of falling back into old, reckless patterns of causing dramatic distractions instead of focusing on her academic survival at Briar University. He threatens to pull her out of the university entirely by the end of the week if she cannot prove she is taking her future seriously. The harsh, biting words trigger a massive wave of anxiety, threatening to completely dismantle the emotional stability she has fought so hard to build. Determined not to let her father crush her spirit this time, Summer decides to use her runway presentation the next morning as her ultimate statement of independence. She spends the entire night in the design studio, sewing, adjusting hems, and perfecting the styling of her collection. She refuses to use her high-fashion styling as a defensive armor to hide behind. Instead, she pours her true, authentic self into the bold, unconventional designs, creating a line that reflects both her inner chaos and her ultimate resilience. The chapter reaches its emotional peak during the morning fashion critique. As Summer watches her models walk the runway, she spots Fitz standing at the very back of the auditorium, still looking exhausted from his team travel, but watching her with a fierce, unwavering pride. The presentation is an absolute triumph, earning high praise from her professor for its brilliant emotional depth and execution. The chapter concludes with Summer walking straight past her classmates into Fitz's waiting arms, completely indifferent to her father's conditional love or the lingering whispers of the campus. fully secure in the knowledge that she has finally earned her success on her own terms, alongside the man who truly understands her soul. Chapter 24 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the profound sense of victory and contentment that has finally settled over his life. Holding Summer in the auditorium after her successful runway show felt like the ultimate turning point, confirming that the worst of the storm is officially behind them. As they sit together in his bedroom the following morning, Fitz is working on his final digital art portfolio for his graduation requirements. The creative block that plagued him for months has completely vanished, replaced by a fluid, inspired focus, and he realizes that Summer's vibrant energy has become the ultimate muse for his video game designs. The primary conflict of the chapter introduces a high-stakes crossroads for Fitz's professional future. He receives an official email from a major digital design studio in California, offering him a prestigious full-time position as a lead concept artist, immediately following his graduation from Briar University. While the offer is an absolute dream come true, the reality of a cross-country move triggers a sudden wave of anxiety. He's deeply torn between pursuing his career ambitions on the West Coast and his fierce desire to stay close to Summer, who still has a year left to complete her fashion design degree at Briar. The narrative shifts to the hockey rink later that afternoon, where the team is gathering for a final regular season meeting before the playoffs begin. The environment in the locker room has shifted dramatically from hostility to a quiet, professional understanding. Hunter approaches Fitz near his locker, and while the easygoing best friend dynamic is gone, Hunter offers a sincere nod of congratulations for Fitz's recent job offer, which has already become public news among the athletic staff. The brief, mature exchange allows Fitz to officially close the chapter on his locker room guilt, proving that their mutual respect as athletes remains fully intact. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that evening, when Fitz decides to be completely transparent with Summer about the California job offer. They sit together on the back porch steps, looking out over the quiet yard where so much of their emotional history unfolded. Instead of reacting with fear or sadness, Summer surprises him with a fierce, unconditional support, refusing to let him compromise his professional dreams for her. She reminds him that they survived weeks of living under the same roof in absolute silence, so navigating a long-distance relationship until her graduation will be a challenge they can easily conquer together. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as he pulls her into a deep, passionate kiss beneath the stars, completely certain that no matter the physical distance between them, their souls are permanently anchored to one another. Chapter 25 shifts back to Summer's perspective, capturing the bittersweet but incredibly grounded reality of the final days of the semester at Briar University. The frantic, chaotic energy that defined her arrival at the hockey house has matured into a deep, resilient confidence. As she helps Fitz pack up his room, wrapping his digital art equipment and boxing up his gaming merchandise, her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind is surprisingly calm. The impending long-distance arrangement with Fitz moving to California and her staying in Boston no longer feels like a looming disaster, but rather an exciting testament to the strength of their relationship. The primary conflict of the chapter centers around graduation day and the emotional weight of final goodbyes. The campus is flooded with proud families, black gowns, and celebratory caps, creating a vibrant, high-stakes atmosphere. Summer handles the logistical stress beautifully, standing tall as a source of absolute support for Fitz, whose quiet nature makes him naturally averse to the massive, loud ceremony. The true test of her emotional growth arrives when she runs into her father in the alumni pavilion. Expecting another harsh lecture, she is instead met with a quiet, surprised respect. Her stellar midterm presentation and academic turnaround have finally forced him to acknowledge her dedication on her own terms. The narrative shifts to the post-graduation celebration back at the hockey house, where the remaining roommates throw a final, emotional gathering for the departing seniors. The house is filled with a warm, nostalgic energy as old pranks and classic games are recounted. In a quiet, unexpected moment in the hallway, Hunter approaches Summer. The interaction is completely devoid of the old resentment, replaced by a mature, genuine understanding. Hunter offers her a sincere smile and wishes her and Fitz the absolute best, officially clearing the final remnants of tension and allowing Summer to fully celebrate the closure of a wild academic year. The chapter reaches its emotional peak late that night after the party has cleared, leaving Fitz and Summer alone in his completely emptied bedroom. Sitting on the mattress on the floor, the absolute purity of their connection is laid bare without any distractions or walls. Fitz looks at her with a depth of love that takes her breath away, thanking her for disrupting his safe, quiet life and showing him what it truly means to fight for happiness. They share an intensely tender, passionate final night together, completely secure in their bond. The chapter concludes with Summer looking out the window at the breaking dawn, her heart full and her mind focused, entirely ready to conquer her senior year because she knows her soul is permanently anchored to the brilliant artist waiting for her on the West Coast. Chapter 26 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the bittersweet reality of moving day as he prepares to leave the Briar University hockey house for the West Coast. The morning sun filters through the empty rooms, casting long shadows over the floors, where so much emotional chaos and growth took place over the semester. Fitz loads the final boxes of his digital design gear into his car, his chest tightening with a complex mixture of intense excitement for his new career in California and a heavy, lingering sadness about leaving Summer behind. He takes one last walk through the house, pausing in the kitchen and the living room, realizing that the very place he once feared would destroy his peace ultimately gave him the love of his life. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds at the Boston Airport terminal, where the reality of the long-distance separation finally catches up with them. The bustling, loud terminal stands in stark contrast to the quiet intimacy they shared the night before. Standing near the security gate, Summer tries to maintain her usual vibrant, high-fashion bravado, but Fitz can see the slight tremble in her hands and the subtle signs of her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind racing as she tries to process the massive transition. The fear of the unknown threatens to cloud their departure, forcing them to confront whether their newly forged bond can truly withstand thousands of miles of physical distance. Determined to ground her before he steps onto the plane, Fitz pulls Summer out of the heavy foot traffic and into a quieter corner of the terminal. Instead of offering empty platitudes, he pulls out a small, beautifully wrapped package from his jacket pocket and hands it to her. When Summer opens it, she finds a custom-bound sketchbook filled with detailed, hand-drawn concept art that Fitz created over the final weeks of the semester. Every single page depicts a beautifully stylized version of her, showcasing her strength, her brilliant design talent, and the quiet moments they shared on the back porch, proving that she has been his ultimate artistic inspiration all along. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as Summer looks up from the sketches, with tears streaming down her face, the last of her anxieties completely melting away under the weight of his devotion. Fitz cradles her face in his massive hands, looking into her eyes with absolute, unwavering certainty as he promises that this departure is not an ending, but simply the prologue to the rest of their lives together. They share a deep, incredibly passionate goodbye kiss that blocks out the entire chaotic airport around them. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as he walks through the security line and turns back one last time to see Summer waving from the crowd, her chin held high and her spirit completely unbroken, leaving him entirely secure in the knowledge that no matter how far he flies, his heart will always remain anchored to her. Chapter 27 shifts back to Summer's perspective, capturing the quiet, echoing stillness of the hockey house now that the seniors have officially moved out. Walking past Fitz's empty room gives her a brief pang of loneliness, but she refuses to let the sadness consume her. Instead, she channels her restless energy into setting up her own dedicated workspace for the upcoming senior year, arranging her sewing machines and fabric rolls with a newfound sense of purpose. Thanks to the deep emotional grounding she found with Fitz, her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder symptoms feel more like a creative superpower than a chaotic hurdle, allowing her to dive into her advanced fashion design concepts with absolute clarity. The primary conflict of the chapter centers around the reality of navigating their new, long-distance dynamic across different time zones. With Fitz completely immersed in his fast-paced orientation as a lead concept artist in California, and Summer managing a heavy summer course load in Boston, finding time to connect proves to be an administrative challenge. Missed FaceTime calls and delayed text messages initially trigger a familiar, lingering anxiety in Summer's chest, making her worry that the vast physical distance might slowly erode the intense closeness they fought so hard to establish. The narrative shifts to a major milestone later that week, when Summer receives an unexpected delivery at the house. It is a massive, professionally printed portfolio book from the California Design Studio's upcoming video game launch. Flipping through the pages, she sees Fitz's name prominently credited in the opening pages, followed by stunning, sweeping digital landscapes that she instantly recognizes from their late-night sessions at his desk. Seeing his dreams manifest into reality fills her with a fierce, independent pride, completely washing away her temporary insecurities and reminding her that their temporary separation is paving the way for an incredible future. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that evening, when their schedules finally align for a late-night video call. As Fitz's face lights up her screen, the thousands of miles between them instantly evaporate. He's sitting at his new studio desk, looking exhausted but incredibly happy, and the moment he sees her, his expression softens into that familiar, intensely devoted look that always takes her breath away. They spend hours talking about his studio layouts and her new fabric collections, realizing that the physical distance has only deepened their intellectual and emotional shorthand. The chapter concludes with Summer leaning against her pillows, listening to the steady, comforting rumble of Fitz's voice through the speaker, completely at peace with the journey ahead, because she knows their love is entirely bulletproof. Chapter 28 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the fast-paced, high-stakes environment of his new life in California. The transition into the professional gaming industry has been an absolute whirlwind, requiring him to sit through intense creative pitch meetings and manage tight production deadlines for the studio's flagship project. Despite the heavy workload and the dazzling West Coast sun, his mind remains completely tethered to Boston. He has arranged his new apartment to mirror the quiet sanctuary he always preferred, keeping Summer's vibrant fashion sketches displayed proudly near his digital drawing monitors as a constant reminder of what keeps him grounded. The primary conflict of the chapter develops when Fitz is given his first major independent assignment as a lead concept artist. The studio head tasks him with designing the central, defining environment for a highly anticipated fantasy game, a project that will be showcased to major international investors at an upcoming digital expo. The pressure is immense, and Fitz initially struggles to find the right balance between the studio's technical requirements and his own artistic instincts. He spends consecutive late nights staring at his digital canvas, the creative blocks threatening to return as he fights the isolation of being the new guy in a massive, competitive corporate structure. The narrative shifts to a critical breakthrough later that week, driven entirely by his connection with Summer. Recognizing his creative frustration during an early morning phone call, Summer encourages him to stop designing with his logic and start designing with his emotions, reminding him of how he used to help her look past the strict rules of fabric design. Taking her advice to heart, Fitz completely reworks his concepts, infusing the digital landscapes with the same raw, dramatic textures and vibrant lighting contrast that defined Summer's triumphant runway collection, effectively turning his longing for her into pure creative fuel. The chapter reaches its emotional peak when Fitz presents his revised environment designs to the studio's creative directors. The presentation is a massive success, earning a rare standing ovation from the senior staff for its unprecedented emotional depth and brilliant, unconventional use of light. The moment the meeting concludes, Fitz walks out to the studio courtyard and dials Summer's number, his chest expanding with a profound sense of shared victory. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as he listens to her ecstatic cheers through the phone line, watching the Pacific sunset, and realizing that even though they are separated by an entire continent, every single success he achieves is entirely hers, proving that their partnership is only growing stronger with every passing mile. Chapter 29 shifts back to Summer's perspective, finding her right in the thick of her senior year at Briar University. The autumn breeze has settled over Boston, bringing with it a mountain of academic pressure as she begins preparing her final graduation collection for the annual New York Student Showcase. Balancing high-stakes fabric scouting, pattern cutting, and model fittings requires an immense amount of mental energy, but Summer handles the chaos with a level of grace that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind is completely dialed into her work, using the fast-paced nature of the fashion department as a canvas for her creativity rather than a source of panic. The primary conflict of the chapter introduces a massive logistical hurdle that threatens to derail her hard work. A major supply chain delay leaves her signature velvet and silk textiles stranded in transit, leaving her with less than a week to source alternative materials or completely redesign 3 central looks of her collection. The sudden crisis triggers a familiar wave of panic, and for a moment, her father's old words about her inability to handle real-world pressure echo loudly in her mind. She is forced to decide whether to compromise her original artistic vision or take a massive gamble on entirely new textures. The narrative shifts to a late-night brainstorming session in the studio, where Summer decides to embrace the challenge rather than let it defeat her. Pulling inspiration from the digital environment sketches Fitz had sent her from California, she decides to experiment with unconventional, structured neoprene and metallic mesh fabrics. The bold choice completely transforms her collection from a classic romantic line into a fierce, modern, and avant-garde statement on resilience. She spends 48 hours straight, draped over her mannequin, pinning and sewing with a reckless, inspired focus that leaves her professors absolutely spellbound during the preliminary check-in. The chapter reaches its emotional peak on Friday evening, when a surprise knock sounds at the front door of the hockey house. Summer walks downstairs, her hands still stained with fabric dye, and opens the door to find Fitz standing on the porch, holding a single suitcase and wearing his signature quiet smile. He had managed to secure a 4-day weekend from his studio to fly across the country and support her through her design crisis. The sheer joy of his physical presence completely overwhelms her, and she throws herself into his arms, tears of relief blurring her vision. The chapter concludes with Summer wrapped tightly in Fitz's embrace in the quiet entryway, the frantic stress of her semester completely melting away as she realizes that no matter how demanding her dreams become, his love will always be the ultimate sanctuary that brings her back to center. Chapter 30 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the absolute, unadulterated perfection of being back in Boston and holding Summer in his arms after months of physical separation. The familiar warmth of the hockey house and the sweet, electric energy radiating from Summer instantly wipe out the exhaustion of his cross-country flight. Standing in the entryway, Fitz looks down at her face, noticing the slight dark circles under her eyes from her relentless studio hours, and feels a fierce, protective wave of love crash over him. He realizes that while his career in California is incredibly fulfilling, his life will never feel truly complete until Summer is permanently by his side. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds over the weekend as Fitz steps into the role of Summer's ultimate design assistant, helping her navigate the final, high-stakes countdown before her New York showcase. The living room of the hockey house is transformed into a chaotic makeshift studio, draped in structured neoprene, metallic mesh, and sketches. Fitz uses his own meticulous eye for digital proportions and tracking lines to help her align the complex avant-garde patterns. Watching Summer work with such fierce, untamed passion completely captivates him, and he spends the days quietly soothing her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder flares, making sure she eats, and reminding her of her immense brilliance whenever the shadow of her father's doubt creeps into her mind. The narrative shifts to Sunday evening, marking their final night together before Fitz has to catch a red-eye flight back to his studio on the West Coast. They decide to escape the clutter of the house and take a quiet walk through the moonlit Briar University campus, eventually stopping outside the ice rink where their paths first collided. Standing in the crisp autumn air, the heavy weight of their impending separation settles over them, but the old anxiety is entirely absent. Instead, they talk openly about the future, mapping out the final months of her senior year and making concrete plans for her move to California after graduation, transforming their long-distance reality into a structured countdown toward a shared life. The chapter reaches its emotional peak when they return to the house and Fitz prepares to leave for the airport. Standing on the back porch steps, where they once shared their deepest vulnerabilities, Summer pulls out a small envelope and hands it to him. Inside, Fitz finds a beautifully crafted fabric patch, embroidered with a stylized design combining his gaming logos and her fashion silhouettes. A physical symbol of their worlds weaving together. Fitz cradles her face in his hands, delivering a deep, lingering kiss that carries the full weight of his devotion and his silent promise for the future. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as his taxi pulls away into the Boston night, his heart bursting with an unbreakable certainty as he looks back at Summer standing under the porch light, fully aware that this departure is simply the final hurdle before their forever begins. Chapter 31 shifts back to Summer's perspective, finding her standing in the wing of a major Manhattan venue as the booming music of the New York Student Showcase echoes through the rafters. The final months of her senior year have completely flown by, and the monumental night she has spent her entire academic career fighting for is finally here. Backstage is a scene of absolute high-stakes adrenaline, filled with frantic models, rushing hairstylists, and the sharp scent of hairspray. Despite the intense sensory overload, Summer's mind remains incredibly grounded. She refuses to let her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder thoughts scatter. Instead, she channels that electric energy into performing final quality checks, ensuring every piece of neoprene and metallic mesh sits flawlessly on her models. The primary conflict of the chapter intensifies as the announcer introduces Briar University's segment, and Summer's collection hits the runway under the blinding spotlights. Standing hidden in the curtains, Her chest tightens as she watches the critical expressions of industry judges and fashion journalists taking notes in the front row. The sudden appearance of her father sitting in the VIP section sends a brief shockwave of anxiety through her system, forcing her to confront the lingering fear of his disapproval one last time. However, as each look glides down the runway to a swelling wave of enthusiastic applause, she realizes she no longer needs his validation to know her worth. Her designs speak for themselves with absolute authority. The narrative reaches its ultimate professional triumph when the showcase concludes, and Summer is called out onto the stage to take her official bow as the head designer. The applause is deafening, but her eyes instantly skip past the flashing cameras and the cheering crowd until they land on the back of the auditorium. Standing there, having secretly flown in from California to surprise her, is Fitz. He is looking at her with a raw, tearful pride that makes the rest of the crowded room completely vanish. The validation from the industry is incredible, but the sight of her quiet artist cheering for her from the back of the room is the true crown of her success. The chapter reaches its emotional peak at the post-showcase reception, where Summer is officially approached by a prominent New York design house offering her a prestigious fellowship. While the opportunity is massive, she turns it down with a radiant, confident smile, explaining that her future is already secured on the West Coast. Moving through the crowd, she escapes the noise and walks straight into Fitz's waiting arms. He lifts her completely off her feet, spinning her around before pulling her into a deep, breathless kiss that tastes like total victory and beautiful new beginnings. The chapter concludes with Summer leaning against Fitz's chest as they look out over the city lights, her mind beautifully focused and her heart completely full, fully aware that her time at Briar University is beautifully complete and that the best chapter of her life is about to begin by his side in California. Chapter 32 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the absolute sun-drenched reality of their new beginning in California. The permanent move-in day has finally arrived, and their shared West Coast apartment is filled with a beautiful, chaotic mix of cardboard boxes, digital drawing monitors, and racks of vibrant fabrics. As Fitz stands by the large floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the palm trees and the distant Pacific horizon, a profound sense of peace settles over him. The grueling days of long-distance separation and the toxic drama of the Briar University hockey house are officially a thing of the past. Hearing Summer humming a familiar tune from the next room as she unpacks makes him realize that his sanctuary is no longer a quiet, isolated space. It is wherever she is. The primary conflict of the chapter focuses on the final emotional transition of letting go of the past to fully embrace the future. While setting up his new home studio, Fitz comes across his old Briar team jersey tucked away at the bottom of a duffel bag. Staring at the alternative captain's patch, a wave of nostalgia hits him, bringing back memories of the intense brotherhood, the grueling practices, and the fallout with Hunter. Just as the old weight of guilt threatens to creep back into his thoughts, his phone buzzes with the incoming video call. It is Hunter, calling from the team's training camp. The conversation is surprisingly easy, filled with casual updates about the new season and mutual congratulations on their respective careers, officially cementing their closure and proving that time and distance have healed the old fractures completely. The narrative shifts to later that afternoon, when Fitz and Summer take a break from unpacking to organize her dedicated fashion design corner. Wanting to surprise her, Fitz reveals a massive, custom-built cutting table he spent weeks designing and ordering to fit her exact creative workflow. He has strategically placed it near the brightest window in the apartment, ensuring her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind has the perfect view and the ultimate layout to channel her electric energy. Seeing her face light up with pure, unadulterated joy as she runs her hands over the smooth surface validates every single challenge they overcame to get to this moment. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as the sun begins to set, casting a warm, golden glow across the entire apartment. They abandon the remaining half-empty boxes and step out onto their private balcony, a cool ocean breeze cutting through the California heat. Fitz wraps his massive arms around Summer from behind, pulling her tight against his chest as they look out over the glittering city lights. For the first time in their entire journey, there are no looming deadlines, no parental expectations, and no secrets separating them. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as Summer turns in his embrace to look up at him, her eyes reflecting the absolute certainty of their bond as they share a deep, slow kiss that marks the true, official beginning of their forever together. Chapter 33 shifts back to Summer's perspective, capturing the effortless, beautiful rhythm they have built into their daily life 6 months after making California their permanent home. Waking up to the sound of the ocean breeze and the sight of Fitz, already awake, quietly sketching at his digital monitor, brings a sense of absolute safety to her world. Her fashion career on the West Coast is thriving, and she has successfully launched her own boutique line. Her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind, once a source of constant internal chaos, is now entirely in harmony with her environment, beautifully balanced by the expansive California light and the steady, grounding presence of the man beside her. The primary conflict of the chapter explores a massive, full-circle moment when Summer receives an invitation to return to Briar University as a guest alumnus speaker for the upcoming freshman fashion orientation. The thought of stepping back onto the campus, where she experienced so much emotional turmoil, self-doubt, and public scrutiny, triggers a brief, lingering anxiety. She is forced to decide whether to decline the offer and stay within her comfortable West Coast sanctuary, or face her past head-on to show a new generation of students that unconventional, chaotic creativity can be molded into brilliant success. With Fitz's unwavering encouragement, Summer decides to fly back to Boston, turning the trip into a celebratory homecoming. Walking through the familiar university hallways, she no longer feels like the misunderstood girl trying to hide behind high-fashion armor. She stands tall, radiating a mature, self-assured confidence that commands the attention of everyone in the room. Her speech in the main auditorium is a profound triumph. She speaks with absolute, breathless honesty about her struggles with focus, the crushing weight of external expectations, and how learning to embrace her authentic self completely transformed her artistry. The chapter reaches its emotional peak on their final evening in Boston, when Fitz takes her for a walk down to the frozen pond near the edge of campus, where they used to skate. Standing beneath the crisp, starlit sky, Fitz pulls her close, his dark eyes reflecting a depth of devotion that has only grown stronger with time. He reaches into his jacket and pulls out a small, elegant velvet box, dropping to one knee on the snow-covered ground. He tells her that she completely shattered his safe, quiet world in the best way possible, and he asks her to spend the rest of her life creating beautiful chaos with him. The book concludes with Summer crying tears of pure, unadulterated joy as she says yes, sealing their journey with a deep, passionate kiss, completely certain that her soul has found its permanent home in his arms. Chapter 34 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the ultimate radiant culmination of their entire journey on a perfect sun-drenched beach in Malibu. The frantic pacing of their college years and the heavy weight of past expectations have completely given way to an absolute, grounded serenity. Standing in front of a full-length mirror in a beachside cottage, Fitz adjusts his formal suit, his chest expanding with a profound, quiet emotion. Looking out the window at the gathering crowd of close friends, former teammates, and family members sitting near the crashing waves, he realizes that every single obstacle, every moment of isolation, and every risk they took was leading directly to this exact shoreline. The primary conflict of the chapter transitions from the external world to the deep, beautiful gravity of making a lifelong commitment. The atmosphere is filled with a warm, celebratory energy as old friends from Briar University mingle with their new West Coast community. In a quiet moment before the ceremony begins, Hunter walks into the dressing room wearing a genuine, proud smile. He claps Fitz on the shoulder, handing him a vintage bottle of whiskey as a wedding gift. The easy, mature warmth in Hunter's eyes signifies the absolute, final healing of their past fracture, replacing old locker room rivalries with a deep, lifelong respect between men who have fully grown into themselves. The narrative reaches its ultimate, breathtaking peak when the music swells and Summer appears at the top of the wooden beach walkway. She is wearing a stunning, avant-garde wedding gown that she completely designed and tailored herself, a brilliant masterpiece of structured silk and unconventional textures that reflects her fierce, beautiful spirit. Watching her walk down the aisle toward him, her eyes completely locked onto his with an absolute, unwavering focus, makes the rest of the world vanish entirely. The attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, mind that once made her feel scattered, is beautifully at peace, anchored by the total devotion radiating from the giant defenseman waiting for her at the altar. The book reaches its official emotional conclusion as they stand hand in hand before the ocean, exchanging vows they wrote for one another. Fitz speaks with absolute, breathless honesty, promising to always protect her creative spark, to soothe her chaotic days, and to stand as her ultimate sanctuary forever. After they are officially pronounced husband and wife, Fitz sweeps Summer completely off her feet, laughing as the crowd erupts into deafening cheers. He pulls her into a deep, passionate kiss against the backdrop of the golden California sunset, completely certain that their souls are permanently woven together and that their beautiful, chaotic forever has officially begun. Chapter 35 shifts back to Summer's perspective, capturing the warm, hazy glow of their first morning as husband and wife in their beachside cottage. The soft sound of the Malibu tide pulling away from the shore perfectly mirrors the absolute peace in her heart. Waking up with Fitz's massive arm draped securely around her waist, she looks down at the simple gold band resting on her finger and feels a deep, resilient sense of belonging. The frantic, high-stakes pressure to prove herself to the world has completely evaporated, replaced by the quiet certainty that she is exactly where she is supposed to be. The primary conflict of the chapter explores the beautiful, messy transition of blending their distinct creative worlds under one roof as a married couple. Now that the wedding festivities have concluded and the guests have headed home, they are faced with the reality of organizing their expanding lives. Summer's boutique fashion line is growing rapidly, requiring more physical space for fabric storage, while Fitz's new role as an art director means his digital equipment demands a more robust studio setup. Managing the physical layout of their shared space triggers a brief, familiar flare of her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, restlessness as she struggles to visualize how to balance the clutter. Instead of letting the logistical stress overwhelm her, Summer finds a perfect rhythm by collaborating directly with her husband. Turning the organization process into a joint design project, they spend the afternoon sketching out a custom floor plan for a shared home studio. Fitz uses his digital precision to map out the exact dimensions, while Summer infuses the layout with bold color schemes and fluid textures. Watching their individual passions effortlessly intertwine on the canvas reminds her that they are no longer two separate entities fighting for space, but a unified team, capable of turning any form of chaos into a masterpiece. The chapter reaches its emotional peak late that evening as they sit together on the cottage porch, wrapped in a single blanket as the cool ocean air rolls in. Fitz pulls a small leather-bound journal from his pocket, one he kept hidden during the wedding prep, and reveals that he has archived every single piece of correspondence, napkin sketch, and plane ticket from their long-distance days, creating a permanent visual timeline of their growth. Looking through the pages together, Summer realizes that every obstacle they faced was just a necessary brushstroke in the larger picture of their life. The story concludes from Summer's viewpoint as she leans her head against Fitz's chest, listening to the steady, comforting beat of his heart, completely ready for the infinite chapters ahead, because she knows their love is the ultimate anchor. Chapter 36 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the steady, deeply fulfilling rhythm of their first official week back in the studio as a married team. The California sun streams through the glass doors of their newly organized creative space, highlighting the perfect harmony they managed to strike between his high-tech digital monitors and her vibrant rolls of fabric. Watching Summer systematically arrange her design shears and sketch pads with a quiet smile gives Fitz a profound sense of pride. The internal pressure he used to carry about balancing his demanding career with his personal life has completely transformed into a collaborative, fluid energy that makes his daily work feel effortless. The primary conflict of the chapter arises when Fitz receives an unexpected phone call from the head office of his digital design studio, presenting him with a massive professional opportunity. The company has greenlit a brand new open-world fantasy franchise, and the executives want Fitz to step up as the sole lead visual architect for the entire project. While it is the exact career milestone he has spent years working toward, the position demands a grueling 3-week international press and scouting tour across Europe to study historical architecture. The sudden prospect of leaving Summer so soon after their wedding creates an immediate tug-of-war between his professional ambition and his protective instinct to stay by her side. The narrative shifts to later that afternoon when Fitz returns home, carrying the heavy weight of the decision on his shoulders. He sits down at the kitchen island, prepared to explain why he intends to turn down the promotion to prioritize their new home life. However, before he can even finish his sentence, Summer cuts him off with a fierce, knowing look. Refusing to let his quiet, self-sacrificing nature stall his dreams, she immediately pulls out her laptop and reveals that her boutique line was recently requested for a European fashion pop-up showcase in Paris during the exact same time frame. Her brilliant, fast-moving mind has already mapped out a joint itinerary, proving once again that her spontaneous energy is the perfect engine to drive them forward. The chapter reaches its emotional peak on the night before their departure as they stand on their balcony, looking out at the distant Pacific horizon. Fitz pulls Summer tight against his chest, completely overwhelmed by the realization that he no longer has to choose between the career of his dreams and the woman he loves. She has woven their lives together so seamlessly that every new challenge simply becomes a shared adventure. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as he kisses the top of her head, listening to her excited chatter about French textiles and historical castles, completely secure in the knowledge that no matter where their careers take them across the globe, their shared sanctuary travels with them. Chapter 37 shifts back to Summer's perspective, capturing the absolute whirlwind romance of their first week in Paris. The City of Light is a sensory paradise, filled with historic architecture, winding cobblestone streets, and the rich scent of fresh pastries and espresso. For Summer, the vibrant atmosphere is pure creative fuel. Her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind is operating at a brilliant, hyper-focused frequency as she balances her morning pop-up gallery setups with afternoon trips to local textile mills, drawing endless inspiration from the classic French elegance surrounding her. The primary conflict of the chapter develops during the high-stakes launch of her European fashion showcase in a beautifully restored gallery in the Marais district. The venue is packed with prominent local designers, influential fashion bloggers, and critical European buyers. Standing in the wings, Summer feels a familiar wave of imposter syndrome creep into her chest as she watches the sophisticated crowd critique her bold, avant-garde neoprene and metallic mesh designs. The fear of being judged as an outsider on one of the world's most prestigious fashion stages threatens to break her confident composure just before she is scheduled to speak. The narrative shifts to a powerful moment of realization when Summer steps out onto the gallery floor to address her guests. Looking toward the back entrance, she spots Fitz slipping into the room, his massive frame standing out completely against the sleek Parisian crowd. He has spent the last 48 hours trapped in intense corporate architecture scouting sessions, yet he abandoned his tight schedule the moment he could to stand as her silent anchor. Seeing the absolute, unwavering adoration in his eyes instantly ground her. She delivers her design presentation with a raw, passionate eloquence that completely wins over the room, securing multiple major orders from top Parisian boutiques. The chapter reaches its emotional peak late that night, after the gallery has cleared. Instead of attending an elite after-party, Summer and Fitz buy a bottle of wine and walk down to the banks of the Seine River, watching the lights of the Eiffel Tower sparkle against the dark water. Wrapped in Fitz's large coat to shield her from the crisp European air, Summer looks back on the incredible distance they have traveled since their days in the Briar hockey house. The chapter concludes with Summer leaning into a deep, slow kiss beneath the Parisian sky, completely at peace with her success and deeply grateful for the quiet artist who has loved her through every single version of her chaos. Chapter 38 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective, capturing the profound sense of accomplishment and creative fulfillment that has defined the final leg of their European tour. Walking through the historic streets of Paris with Summer has infused his digital architecture designs with a level of classical depth he could never have replicated in a studio basement. As he reviews his finalized concept art pitches on his laptop, he realizes that the sprawling, epic landscapes he created for his new franchise are entirely shaped by the vibrant, romantic energy Summer has brought into his life. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds during Fitz's final, high-stakes presentation to the international video game executives at their European headquarters. The meeting room is sterile and intimidating, filled with strict industry veterans demanding a flawless pitch. When a technical glitch suddenly freezes the main presentation screen, cutting off his digital models midway through the presentation, a familiar, quiet panic threatens to freeze Fitz in place. Instead of retreating into his old defensive silence, he channels the reckless resilience he has watched Summer display during her own design crises. He steps forward with absolute confidence, using a physical whiteboard to manually sketch out the narrative flow and architectural scale, with a raw, masterful precision that leaves the corporate board completely spellbound. The narrative shifts to the immediate aftermath of the meeting, where the studio executives officially sign off on his vision, cementing his status as a premier visual architect in the gaming world. Flooded with a massive rush of adrenaline, Fitz bypasses the standard corporate celebratory dinner, desperate to share the victory with his ultimate partner. He races back to their boutique hotel room, bursting through the door to find Summer surrounded by layout maps and Parisian fabric swatches, her eyes lighting up the exact moment she sees the triumphant look on his face. The chapter reaches its emotional peak as the reality of their joint international success fully settles over them. They spend their final night in Paris packing their bags, preparing for the long flight back to their California sanctuary. Standing together by the hotel's classic wrought-iron balcony, looking out over the glowing Parisian rooftops one last time, Fitz pulls Summer flush against his chest. He slips his arms around her waist, completely overwhelmed by how beautifully their individual worlds have merged into a single, unstoppable force. The chapter concludes from Fitz's viewpoint as they share a quiet, lingering kiss against the backdrop of the city lights, entirely ready to return home, fully aware that no matter how massive their professional horizons become, their greatest masterpiece will always be the life they are building together. Chapter 39 shifts back to Summer's perspective, capturing the high-energy reality of their return to California as the global success of her Parisian showcase completely transforms her boutique brand. The bright West Coast sun floods her expanded studio space, illuminating racks of newly arrived French textiles and a mountain of international shipping manifests. Her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind is operating at a brilliant, hyper-focused velocity, orchestrating production schedules, communicating with European buyers, and sketching out a brand new resort wear line. The chaotic pace no longer threatens to overwhelm her. Instead, it serves as the ultimate creative fuel, beautiful and perfectly balanced by the rhythmic, grounding presence of her husband working just across the room. The primary conflict of the chapter develops when Summer is approached by a major international luxury retail conglomerate looking to acquire a controlling stake in her fashion label. The corporate executives present a massive, financially staggering contract that promises to place her designs in major department stores worldwide, but it comes with a heavy catch. She would have to relinquish final creative control over her fabric selections and avant-garde silhouettes, conforming her bold style to standard commercial trends. The sudden crossroads forces Summer to confront her deepest artistic values, triggering a fierce internal battle between the allure of massive global fame and her unyielding commitment to her authentic creative voice. The narrative shifts to an intense late-night strategy session at their shared design desk, where Summer walks Fitz through the rigid corporate constraints of the contract. Instead of offering a purely logical or financial analysis, Fitz reminds her of the resilience she displayed when her original textiles were stranded during her senior year at Briar. He encourages her to trust the fierce independence that made her a breakout success in New York and Paris, refusing to let corporate suits dilute the raw, beautiful energy that defines her soul. Bolstered by his unwavering faith, Summer decides to reject the acquisition offer entirely, choosing instead to secure a specialized independent business loan that allows her to expand her production capacity while maintaining absolute, uncompromised creative ownership of her brand. The chapter reaches its emotional peak later that weekend when Fitz surprises her with an impromptu celebration to honor her fierce independence. He drives her up to a secluded overlook in the Santa Monica Mountains, where they can see the glittering expanse of the coastline and the vast Pacific Ocean beneath a blanket of stars. Sitting on the hood of his truck, Fitz pulls out a beautifully framed rendering of the flagship boutique she had casually sketched months ago, revealing that he has already used his architectural connections to help her scout a physical location in downtown Los Angeles. The sheer depth of his partnership completely overwhelms her, washing away the final lingering doubts about her business decision. The chapter concludes with Summer wrapped securely in Fitz's massive arms as a cool mountain breeze sweeps over them, her mind brilliantly clear and her heart bursting with anticipation for the future, fully aware that building her empire on her own terms, alongside her quiet artist, is the greatest triumph she could ever achieve. Chapter 40 switches back to Colin Fitzgerald's perspective capturing a profound sense of structural permanence and quiet triumph as he stands in the center of the raw, unfinished commercial space in downtown Los Angeles. The morning sun cuts through the massive floor-to-ceiling industrial windows, illuminating the exposed brick walls and concrete floors that will soon become the physical flagship boutique for Summer's independent fashion brand. Holding a rolled-up set of architectural blueprints in his hands, Fitz feels an overwhelming wave of pride. The transition from designing fictional digital environments for video games to physically drafting the structural layout, lighting grids, and structural flow of his wife's real-world empire has been one of the most challenging and deeply fulfilling creative projects of his life. The primary conflict of the chapter unfolds when the city building inspectors and structural contractors raise a series of unexpected zoning and safety hurdles regarding the central feature of Fitz's architectural design: a sweeping, avant-garde floating staircase constructed from structural steel and reclaimed timber, designed to mimic the fluid lines of a draped fabric roll. The lead contractor argues that the complex physics of the floating design will delay the grand opening by months and demands that they substitute it with a standard, uninspired industrial stairwell to meet the strict corporate opening deadline. The sudden setback threatens to compromise the core visual identity of the boutique, forcing Fitz to confront the reality of real-world bureaucratic pressure that cannot be solved with digital rendering software. Refusing to let corporate convenience dilute Summer's grand vision, Fitz spends the next 48 hours locked in a hyper-focused design battle. Utilizing his advanced digital modeling software, he re-engineers the weight distribution and structural support brackets of the staircase, working late into the night beneath the dim glow of his monitors, while Summer quietly keeps him supplied with espresso and sits cross-legged on the floor beside him, cutting fabric swatches. By the time the construction board reconvenes the following morning, Fitz presents a brilliant, structurally bulletproof revision that utilizes concealed tension cables, successfully proving that the avant-garde design meets every safety code without sacrificing an ounce of artistic integrity. The contractors back down, deeply impressed by the quiet defenseman's absolute mastery of spatial engineering. The narrative shifts forward several weeks to the night before the official grand opening of the boutique, a milestone that aligns perfectly with the highly anticipated global launch of Fitz's open-world fantasy video game franchise. The sheer volume of shared success is staggering, yet the atmosphere within their completed creative sanctuary is remarkably intimate. Walking through the finished boutique, Fitz watches the warm, precisely calibrated spotlights illuminate Summer's bold resort wear collections, the metallic mesh and French silk designs reflecting beautifully against the structural steel of his floating staircase. Every square inch of the space is a tangible, physical manifestation of their combined souls, a perfect marriage of his structural grounding and her vibrant, untamed chaos. The chapter reaches its absolute emotional peak late that evening when the final delivery truck arrives, dropping off a heavy, custom-designed iron sign to be mounted above the main entrance. Working together under the streetlights of the quiet Los Angeles Avenue, Fitz uses his massive frame to hoist the heavy structure into place while Summer secures the bolts. Stepping back onto the sidewalk, they look up to see the name of her brand shining brightly against the night sky, underscored by a subtle graphic element from Fitz's digital design portfolio. The journey that began with hostile silence in a crowded college hockey house in Boston has transformed into a seamless, unbreakable partnership that has conquered two distinct global industries. The book reaches a powerful, lingering conclusion from Fitz's viewpoint as he pulls Summer tight against his chest, shielding her from the cool evening breeze rolling off the Pacific. Looking down at her radiant, fiercely confident face, he realizes that the quiet sanctuary he spent his entire life trying to protect was never meant to be a hidden, isolated room. It was always meant to be this beautiful, expansive life they built out in the open together. As summer turns in his embrace, her eyes reflecting the glowing lights of the city and the absolute certainty of their forever, they share a deep, slow, and profoundly passionate kiss that seals the final page of their prologue, completely ready to step into the infinite, brilliant chapters of the empire they created on their own terms. Chapter 41 shifts back to Summer's perspective, capturing the electric, high-fashion glamour of the boutique's official opening night in downtown Los Angeles. The warm California evening is alive with the hum of a massive crowd, flashing camera lenses, and the steady bass of a deep house track vibrating through the exposed brick walls. The space is a brilliant, living masterpiece. The avant-garde clothing collections look breathtaking under the specialized lighting, and the sweeping, floating staircase, Fitz engineered, serves as the dramatic centerpiece of the entire room. Looking out at the sea of influential West Coast stylists, fashion editors, and early supporters, Summer feels a profound sense of triumph. Her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder mind beautifully dialed into the vibrant energy of her success. The primary conflict of the chapter develops when a prominent fashion critic from a major global syndicate pulls Summer aside, offering a glittering review, but casually asking who the genius architect was behind the boutique's stunning physical layout. When Summer proudly introduces Fitz, the critic makes a dismissive, patronizing comment about how rare it is for a rugged, professional athlete to comprehend high-end aesthetic design, implying that his involvement was likely just a vanity project funded by his hockey career. The sudden, condescending remark strikes a raw nerve in Summer, triggering a fierce protective instinct as she refuses to let anyone diminish the immense talent, late nights, and brilliant engineering her husband poured into their shared dream. Before Summer can unleash a fierce, unfiltered defense, the narrative shifts as Fitz calmly steps into the conversation with his signature, quiet confidence. Instead of getting defensive, he speaks with absolute mastery about the spatial geometry, the tension cable mechanics of the staircase, and how the structural lines were specifically designed to complement the fluid movement of Summer's signature textiles. His effortless authority and deep intellectual clarity completely silence the critic, turning the condescending moment into a showcase of his profound talent. Watching her quiet artist command the room with such grace fills Summer with an intense, independent pride, reminding her that they no longer have to prove their worth to anyone but each other. The chapter reaches its emotional peak late that night, after the final guests have departed and the heavy glass doors are locked. The showroom is empty, filled with the peaceful afterglow of a historic success. Summer kicks off her high-fashioned heels and takes Fitz by the hand, leading him up to the top landing of the floating staircase. Looking down at the beautiful empire they built from the ground up, she wraps her arms around his neck, overwhelmed by the absolute perfection of their partnership. The book reaches a beautiful, lingering milestone from Summer's viewpoint as Fitz lifts her securely into his arms, kissing her with a deep, passionate intensity that echoes through the quiet boutique, completely sealing the reality that no matter how high her career soars, his love will always be the beautiful, unbreakable anchor that keeps her grounded. The epilogue switches between both Colin Fitzgerald's and Summer's perspectives, finding them 5 years after the grand opening of the Los Angeles boutique. The setting is a breathtaking, custom-designed, mid-century modern home nestled in the hills of Malibu, a physical structure that Fitz architecturally drafted himself to perfectly capture the rolling California light. The morning is peaceful, filled with the comforting scent of brewing espresso and the distant, rhythmic sound of the Pacific tide. Standing by the kitchen island, Fitz looks out toward the sun-drenched patio where Summer is seated at a large wooden work table, her vibrant energy as magnetic as the day they first met in the crowded Briar University hockey house. The narrative shifts to a beautiful glimpse into their daily life, showcasing how seamlessly their individual worlds have grown together over the years. Summer's independent fashion label has evolved into a global powerhouse, yet she still maintains her raw, authentic creative control, refusing to let corporate trends dictate her vision. Fitz has risen to become a legendary creative director in the gaming industry, his structural designs recognized worldwide for their unprecedented emotional depth. Despite the massive scale of their professional empires, their greatest triumph is the unshakable sanctuary they have created at home, where Fitz's steady, grounding presence continues to be the perfect anchor for Summer's brilliant, fast-moving mind. The emotional heart of the epilogue unfolds as Summer walks into the kitchen, carrying a brand-new leather-bound portfolio. She slides it across the counter to Fitz, her eyes shining with a familiar, electric excitement. When Fitz opens it, he finds a series of beautiful, hand-drawn concept sketches for a brand-new line of children's resort wear, interspersed with digital structural renderings of a miniature creative play studio. Summer leans against his chest, looking up at him with a radiant, emotional smile as she shares the news that their family is about to expand. The realization that they are about to bring a child into the beautiful, structured chaos of the life they built together leaves the giant defenseman completely breathless with joy. The story reaches its ultimate full-circle conclusion later that evening as they walk down to the edge of the shore, the sky painted in brilliant shades of gold and deep violet. Fitz wraps his massive arms around Summer from behind, his hands resting gently over hers, completely overwhelmed by the profound depth of their journey. They started as polar opposites, fighting through hostile silence, intense long-distance separation, and parental expectations, only to build an unbreakable empire entirely on their own terms. The book ends with a shared, deeply passionate kiss against the backdrop of the sunset, their hearts perfectly aligned and their souls permanently woven together, completely ready for the infinite, beautiful chapters of the forever they created.